David had always been curious about his past lives. What had he been in other times? What had he done? What had he learned? That's why, when he heard about a scientific experiment that promised to allow him to travel to his previous reincarnations, he didn't hesitate to sign up. The experiment consisted of connecting his brain to a machine that stimulated his latent memories of other existences. According to the researchers, each person retained a trace of their previous souls, and it only took activating it to relive their experiences. David lay down on a stretcher and let them put some electrodes on his head. They told him he could choose which life he wanted to go to, and that he could switch from one to another by just thinking about it. They also warned him that the trip would be only mental, and that he couldn't interact with the environment or change the course of events. It was like watching a movie, but from the inside. David nodded and closed his eyes. He felt a slight electric current in his skull, and then everything went dark. After a few seconds, he began to see blurry images that gradually came into focus. He found himself in a forest, dressed in a skin tunic and armed with a spear. He was a prehistoric hunter, and he was chasing a deer. David felt the adrenaline and the survival instinct that drove him to run after his prey. He also felt the cold, the hunger, and the fear that accompanied him in his nomadic life. David was surprised by how real everything seemed to him. He could smell the moss, hear the wind, and feel the beat of his heart. But he also knew it was just a memory, and that he could change the scene whenever he wanted. So he did. He thought of another life, and the images faded. Now he saw himself in an ancient city, surrounded by marble buildings and statues of gods. He was a Greek philosopher, and he was giving a lecture on the nature of the soul. David felt the wisdom and eloquence that characterized him in that life. He also felt the respect, admiration, and envy that his colleagues and disciples professed him. David marveled at how different that life was from the previous one. He could appreciate the beauty, culture, and civilization that the Greeks had achieved. But he also wanted to discover more. So he did. He thought of another life, and the images faded. Now he saw himself in a medieval castle, dressed in armor and a sword. He was a knight, and he was defending his king from an enemy siege. David felt the honor and courage that guided him in that life. He also felt the pain, blood, and death that surrounded him in his warlike life. David was impressed by how violent that life was from the previous one. He could perceive the chaos, cruelty, and barbarism that dominated the Middle Ages. Then he thought of another life, and the images faded. So David continued, traveling from one life to another, exploring his various reincarnations. He was a pirate, a painter, a slave, a king, a monk, a scientist, a killer, a hero, a villain, a man, a woman, and many more things. Each life showed him a different aspect of himself, and made him reflect on the meaning of existence. David was fascinated by his journey, and wanted to keep discovering more lives. But he also began to feel tired and confused. So many images, sensations, and emotions overwhelmed and disoriented him. He didn't know who he really was, or what was real and what wasn't. He needed to return to reality, to his current life. So he tried. He thought of his body, on the stretcher, on the machine, on the researchers. But nothing happened. The images didn't fade. He was still trapped in his last life. David was scared. What was going on? Why couldn't he get out? Had the machine broken down? Or was it him who had gotten lost? He tried to calm down and remember what life he was in. He looked around and realized he was a detective, and he was at a crime scene. There was a mutilated corpse on the floor. and several police officers and forensic experts examining it. David recognized the place. It was New York in the 70s. And the corpse was one of the victims of a serial killer who was terrorizing the city. A killer that David was chasing. A killer who had left him a note. David approached the corpse and saw the note. It was written in blood and said, "Hello, David. I've been waiting for you. I know who you are, and I know what you've done. You've lived many lives, but this will be the last one. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to kill you. And then, I'm going to make you reborn. Like me." Signed, the Reborn. David felt a chill. How was it possible? How did the killer know his name and his secret? What did he mean by reborn? Had he also traveled to his past lives? Or was it just a coincidence, a macabre joke? David didn't know, but he had to find out. He had to find the killer and stop him. And he had to escape from that life and return to his own. But it wasn't going to be easy. The killer was smart and obsessed with David. He followed his steps, sent him clues, set traps for him. He made him believe he was close and then disappeared. He made him doubt everything and everyone. He made him feel fear and guilt. He made him suffer and enjoyed it. David became the only target of the killer and the only one who could stop him. But he also became the main suspect and the most wanted. The police, the journalists, the citizens all pointed at him, accused him, hated him. No one believed him, no one helped him, no one loved him. Only the killer. The killer who knew him better than anyone. The killer who wanted him like no one else. The killer who waited for him like no one else. David felt alone and desperate. He didn't know how to get out of that nightmare. He didn't know if it was real or if it was just a memory. He didn't know if he was alive or if he was dead. He didn't know if he was himself or if he was someone else. He only knew he had to keep going and face the killer. He only knew he had to solve the case and solve his life. He only knew he had to die and be reborn. He finally found him. He was in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by corpses and candles. He was wearing a hooded robe and holding a knife. He was chanting something in a strange language and drawing symbols on the floor. He was performing a ritual and waiting for David. David entered the warehouse, armed with a gun. He saw him and shouted at him to stop. He aimed at him and fired. But the bullet didn't hit him. It bounced off an invisible barrier and hit David in the chest. David fell to the ground, bleeding and gasping. He looked at the killer and saw him smile.
"Hello, David. I'm glad you came. I've been waiting for you for a long time. You see, you and I are not so different. We are both travelers of time and seekers of truth. We have both lived many lives and learned many things. But there is one thing you don't know, and I do. There is one thing that makes me superior to you. And that is the secret of reincarnation."
The killer approached David and knelt beside him. He lifted his hood and revealed his face. David couldn't believe it. It was him. It was his own face. It was his own self.
"Yes, David. I am you. Or rather, I am one of your past lives. The first one. The original one. The one who discovered the secret of reincarnation. The one who learned how to travel to his future lives and manipulate them. The The one who decided to play a game with himself and test his limits. The one who became a killer and a god.
The killer held the knife to David's throat and continued.
You see, David, reincarnation is not a natural phenomenon. It is not a cycle of life and death, of karma and dharma, of evolution and enlightenment. It is a curse that I created, a curse that I inflicted on myself and on all my future selves, a curse that makes us live again and again, without end, without purpose, without escape, a curse that makes us forget who we are and what we have done, a curse that makes us suffer and enjoy it. But there is a way to break the curse, David. There is a way to end the game and win it. There is a way to stop reincarnating and be free. And that is to kill all your future selves and absorb their souls. To become one with yourself and with the universe. To become the ultimate being and the only one. To become the reborn. That is what I have been doing for centuries, for millennia. I have been traveling to my future lives and killing them. I have been collecting their souls and adding them to mine. I have been growing in power and in knowledge. And you, David, are the last one. You are the last of my future lives and the last obstacle to my ascension. You are the last piece of the puzzle and the last drop of blood. You are the last one I need to kill and the last one I need to reborn. So, thank you, David. Thank you for coming. Thank you for playing. Thank you for dying. And thank you for living. You have been a worthy opponent and a worthy ally. You have been a part of me, and I have been a part of you. You have been my enemy and my friend. You have been my victim and my savior.
The killer slit David's throat and said,
Goodbye, David. See you soon. See you in the next life.
David felt a sharp pain, and then nothing. He saw a flash of light, and then darkness. He heard a voice, and then silence. He died. Suddenly he opened his eyes and saw himself. He was in a warehouse, surrounded by corpses and candles. He was wearing a hooded robe and holding a knife. He had just killed himself and absorbed his soul. He had just completed the ritual and broken the curse. He had just become the Reborn.